The billionaire froze in the middle of the hotel hallway. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Because the woman pushing a cleaning cart toward room 417 wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't supposed to be wearing a gray housekeeping uniform. She wasn't supposed to be changing bed sheets for strangers. And she definitely wasn't supposed to be hiding from the world. 18 months earlier, she had vanished without a trace just 3 months before their wedding. No explanation. No warning. No goodbye. Now she stood only a few feet away. And what he would discover in the next hour would reveal a secret so shocking it would destroy everything he thought he knew about the woman he loved. But the truth wasn't what anyone expected. Before we get into the heart of this story, take a moment right now and ask yourself something honestly. If the person you loved most in the world was in danger because of you, would you have the courage to walk away from them? Even if it broke you? Even if they never knew the real reason? Hold that thought. Because that is exactly the question that defined every single day of this woman's life. And the answer she arrived at was one of the most painful and quietly courageous things a person can do. She chose to disappear. Not into darkness. Not into self-destruction. But into invisibility. Into a gray uniform. Into early mornings and clean sheets and a hotel hallway where nobody knew her name or her story or the life she had walked away from. Her name was Claire Merritt. And when this story begins, she was 29 years old, standing in a hotel supply closet in Austin, Texas, folding clean pillowcases at 6:45 in the morning, before most of the hotel guests had even opened their eyes. She wore a gray uniform that was one size too large. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her hands were already sore from the overnight deep clean she had finished just 2 hours earlier on the 4th floor. She had a small locker in the break room downstairs that contained exactly 3 things. A granola bar. A photograph she never let anyone see. And a prepaid phone that she never used to call anyone except her younger sister, once a week, for exactly 4 minutes. That was her life now. Quiet. Contained. Invisible. And she had chosen every single part of it. But it had not always been this way. Not even close. 18 months earlier, Claire Merritt had been the kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room. Not because of what she wore, although she dressed well. Not because of her career, although she ran a successful architectural firm in Nashville with 4 full-time employees and a client list that had taken her 6 years to build. People noticed Claire because of the way she listened. She had this quality, rare and almost disarming, of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when she gave you her full attention. She looked at you like what you were saying actually mattered. And it did, to her. It genuinely did. She grew up in a modest home in Knoxville, Tennessee, raised by a mother who worked the front desk at a medical clinic and a father who drove freight trucks across state lines 6 days a week. They were not wealthy. But the house was warm. And Claire carried that warmth into everything she touched, her work, her friendships, and eventually the relationship that would change the entire course of her life. His name was Daniel Holt. He was 34 when they met, the founder of a logistics technology company that had recently expanded into 4 states and was generating the kind of quiet, steady profit that people in business circles respect more than flashy growth. Daniel was not the kind of man who wore his wealth loudly. No flashy watches. No performances for strangers. He drove a clean black SUV and kept his office neat and almost bare, a whiteboard, a desk, a chair, and a window overlooking downtown Nashville. A mutual friend introduced them at a charity auction in the spring, and Daniel walked up to Claire and said, with complete sincerity, "I have no idea what half of these pieces mean, but this one reminds me of something my grandmother used to say." He pointed at a small oil painting of a woman standing alone at the edge of a field at dusk. Claire smiled and asked him what his grandmother used to say. He told her. And they talked for 3 hours straight, until the venue staff started stacking chairs around them and they both realized they had completely forgotten where they were. That was the beginning. They dated for 14 months. And in those 14 months, Claire experienced something she had quietly doubted she would ever find. A relationship where she did not have to shrink herself to fit. Daniel was genuinely curious about her. He asked real questions and remembered the answers weeks later. He showed up when he said he would. He was not perfect. He could be stubborn and occasionally impatient, and he had a habit of going completely quiet for hours when he was stressed instead of talking things through. But his flaws were honest ones. And honest flaws, Claire had always believed, were something you could actually work with. He proposed to her on a Tuesday evening. Not a holiday. Not a planned occasion. Just a regular Tuesday, because he told her he didn't want to wait for a moment that felt scripted. He got down on one knee in her kitchen while she was washing dishes, and when she turned around with soap still on her hands, he simply said, "I don't want to do this life without you." She said yes before he finished the sentence. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it feels like to finally trust someone enough to say yes without hesitation. To hand them the most unguarded version of yourself and feel completely safe doing it. Now imagine what it would take to walk away from that. What would have to happen for you to leave the one person who finally made you feel like you were exactly enough? Because 3 months after that Tuesday night proposal, something arrived in Claire's life that made staying not just difficult, but dangerous. It started with a phone call. Not from a stranger. It came from a man named Gerald Prue, and in certain financial circles across the southeastern United States, that name carried serious weight. Gerald Prue was the senior partner at a private equity firm called Prue Capital Partners, and for the past 6 years, he had been slowly and quietly acquiring stakes in mid-sized companies using funds that, as investigators would eventually discover, were not entirely his to use. Claire had not known any of this when she accepted a contract to design the expansion of his firm's new headquarters building in Memphis, 18 months before her engagement. She had simply done the work. She was paid. The project was completed. She moved on. But the design process had required access to the firm's internal floor plans, internal communications about space usage, and certain structural documents that crossed her desk as part of the architectural brief. Most architects would have looked at those documents as nothing more than project specifications. But Claire was meticulous. And somewhere in the space planning documents, buried in a spreadsheet she had requested to understand traffic flow between departments, was a set of numbers that made no sense. Investment cycle timelines that didn't align with the firm's stated client portfolio. Capital reserve allocations attributed to accounts that, when she researched the account names out of simple professional curiosity, appeared to belong to individuals who had died years earlier. She did not fully understand what she was looking at. But she documented it the way a precise person always does. She saved the files to an encrypted external drive, made a careful note in her own project records, and then did nothing with them for 18 months. Because she convinced herself it was probably just an accounting structure she didn't fully understand. A legal complexity above her professional lane. She told herself that. And it worked, right up until the morning Gerald Prue called her. His voice on the phone was calm and controlled in the particular way that signals a person who has rehearsed the conversation before dialing. He told her quietly that he knew she had accessed documents beyond her architectural scope. He told her his firm had been monitoring digital access logs since the project closed. And then he said, very slowly, very clearly, "We need to make sure you understand the cost of sharing things that don't belong to you." He did not threaten her directly. He was too careful for that. But he mentioned, in the same calm tone, that her fiancé's company had recently accepted a small investment from a fund he had significant influence over. And that influence, he implied, could remain quiet. Or it could become very loud, very fast. Claire sat in her car in a parking garage for 1 hour and 40 minutes after that call. She did not cry. She thought. She ran the situation through her mind from every direction the way she always approached a complex architectural problem. What were the load-bearing walls? What would collapse first? And she arrived at a conclusion that felt like swallowing something sharp. If she stayed close to Daniel, Gerald Prue would use him. Not because Daniel had done anything wrong, but because he was the clearest pressure point available. The moment Daniel became a target, his company, his employees, his investors, and everyone connected to him would be pulled into something none of them deserved to be part of. She could not prove what she had found without triggering the very escalation she was being warned about. And she could not tell Daniel without placing him at the center of a situation he had no defense against. So she made a decision. She would leave. Completely enough that Daniel would believe it was real. That way he would not come looking. That way he would not be standing beside her when the pressure finally arrived. She broke off the engagement on a Thursday morning. She called Daniel and told him, in a voice that cost her everything she had to keep steady, that she wasn't ready. That she had been dishonest with herself about what she truly wanted. That she cared about him deeply but she could not go through with it. He was quiet for a long time after she finished. Then he asked one question. "Is there someone else?" She said no. And that was the only completely true thing she said in the entire conversation. There was no one else. There was only fear, and a file on an encrypted drive, and a man with a calm voice who had made her feel, for the first time in her life, genuinely cornered. She hung up. She packed a single bag. She called her sister, told her just enough so she would not panic, made her promise not to share her location with anyone, and drove south. She ended up in Austin not because it held any meaning, but because she had driven until exhaustion forced her to stop, and Austin was simply where she stopped. She found a room in a shared house for $350 a month. She cut her hair shorter than she had ever worn it. She applied for work under her full legal name because disappearing entirely was never the plan. Simply becoming invisible was. She was hired at the Grand Meridian Hotel on her second application. Her supervisor, a compact and efficient woman named Beverly, told her during orientation that the job required precision and discretion. Claire almost smiled. She had spent her entire adult life practicing both. Now before we go any further into what happened next, let us pause here for just a moment. Because this story gets deeper, and heavier, and ultimately more beautiful than you might expect right now. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and let us know where you are watching this from. We love seeing where our African Untold Stories viewers are tuning in from all around the world. And if you are new here, click that subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We have stories ahead that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Now, back to Claire. For 11 months, Claire Merritt cleaned rooms. She made beds. She restocked miniature soaps and folded the edges of toilet paper into small neat triangles the way Beverly had shown her on the first day. She worked the early morning shift, 5 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, because the early morning felt more manageable somehow. More honest. The world was quieter before other people were fully awake. She ate alone most days, usually a sandwich she had packed from home, sitting at a corner table in the staff break room with her eyes on the middle distance. She sent her sister the same short message every Sunday evening. Still here. Still okay. She saved money carefully, not extravagantly but methodically, the way people save when they are not sure what they are saving for. And she thought about Daniel every single day. Not in an obsessive or consuming way. In the way you think about a song that once meant everything to you. Quietly. Without choosing to. When she saw a man in the lobby tilt his head to one side while laughing and the angle was the same. When she passed a whiteboard in a conference room and remembered his office. When her hands went still over a stack of pillowcases and she had to consciously make herself keep moving. What she did not know during any of those 11 months was that Gerald Prue's operation had already begun to collapse without any action from her. A forensic accountant hired by one of Prue Capital's own institutional investors had, over the course of 8 quiet months, assembled a paper trail connecting the firm to a multi-state fraud scheme involving the misallocation of pension funds from 3 separate state employee retirement programs. A federal investigation had been formally opened in February of that year. And 6 weeks before the morning that changed everything, Gerald Prue had been placed under federal indictment. Claire knew none of it. She had disabled news alerts on her phone 11 months earlier because reading headlines made it too difficult to sleep. What she did know was that on a Tuesday morning in September, she was pushing her cleaning cart down the fourth-floor corridor of the Grand Meridian when the elevator at the far end of the hallway opened. She did not look up immediately. She was checking her room assignment sheet. Standard procedure. Then she heard a voice. A voice speaking into a phone. "No, push the 9 o'clock meeting. I'll be back in Nashville by tomorrow evening." She looked up. And standing 40 feet away, just stepped off the elevator with a carry-on bag and a boarding pass folder still in his hand, was Daniel Holt. She did not move. For 3 full seconds she stood completely still in the middle of that corridor with the cleaning cart between them and 11 months of silence pressing down on her chest like something physical. He hadn't seen her yet. He was scanning his key card and reaching for the handle of room 417. She could have turned the cart. She could have gone back through the service stairwell door 12 feet behind her. The thought crossed her mind in the same instant she realized her hands were trembling against the cart handle. But she did not move. Because something in her, something older and deeper than strategy or fear, simply would not allow it. He opened the door to his room. And then he paused. And turned around. He saw the cart first. Then the uniform. Then her face. The phone went quiet in his hand. He didn't hang up. He just stopped speaking mid-sentence and stood completely still. The hallway was silent except for the soft hum of the ice machine at the far end of the corridor. Daniel lowered his phone slowly. He looked at her the way you look at something you have been carrying in your memory and are suddenly not certain is real. Then he said her name. Just that. Quietly. Without anger. Without accusation. Simply her name, the way a person says something they have been turning over in their mind for a long time. Claire. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. He took one careful step toward her and then stopped. As though he remembered some boundary she had drawn and was still, even now, even here, choosing to respect it. That one small gesture, that one step and deliberate stop, broke something open in her chest that had been carefully sealed shut for 11 months. She said, "I need to explain something to you." He said, "Okay." Just that. He walked back to his room door, opened it, and held it open. She left her cart in the hallway and walked inside. She talked for 40 minutes. She told him everything. The documents in the Memphis project. The spreadsheet with the numbers that made no sense. The phone call from Gerald Prue. What he had said about Daniel's company. The decision she had made sitting alone in a parking garage because she could not see another way through. She did not perform any of it. She told it the way it had happened, sitting on the edge of the hotel room chair with her hands folded in her lap and her voice steady in the particular way a person's voice gets steady when they are past the point of hiding and have nothing left to protect except the truth. Daniel listened without a single interruption. When she finished, he sat on the corner of the bed with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the floor, and for a long moment he did not speak. Then he said, "He was indicted 6 weeks ago." She looked up. "Gerald Prue," Daniel said. "Federal fraud charges. The investigation has been running since February. His firm is finished." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of 11 months of 5 in the morning alarms, of Sunday messages to her sister, of a photograph in a locker, of a choice made in a parking garage by a woman who believed she had no other option. Daniel looked up at her. His eyes were wet. Not crying, but right at the edge of it, the place a person reaches when something they have been carrying for a long time finally gets set down. "You walked away from everything," he said. "To protect me." She nodded once. He exhaled slowly. It was not relief exactly. It was something heavier and more honest than relief. The kind of exhale a person makes when they finally understand a question that has been unanswerable for months. Then he said, very quietly, I want you to know that I never believed what you told me on that phone call. I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't figure out what it was. She looked at him and felt, for the first time in 11 months, something she had forgotten the weight of. Seen. Completely and without any performance at all, seen. She said, I should have trusted you enough to tell you. He said, yeah. You should have. And then, after a pause, he said, but I understand why you didn't. No speeches. No dramatic declarations. Just a man and a woman sitting in a hotel room in Austin, Texas, on a Tuesday morning in September, finally in the same room with the truth between them. How would you have felt in that moment, if you were Claire? Sitting across from someone you loved, knowing that every single morning of the past 11 months could have been different if you had made a different choice in that parking garage. Would you feel relief? Would you feel regret? Or would you feel both of those things at the same time, layered on top of each other the way most honest things in life tend to feel? Think about that. Because what came next was not simple. It was not an immediate reunion wrapped in warmth and certainty. Real life rarely offers that. And this story is nothing if not real. Daniel had spent 11 months rebuilding after what he had believed was a rejection. He had poured himself into his company. He had gone to therapy consistently. And 3 months before this September morning, he had very carefully begun spending time with someone. Her name was Lauren, and she was a thoughtful and patient person who had quietly given her time to a man who was clearly not fully present, because he was still processing something he could not name. Claire knew none of this. She learned it when Daniel told her directly, the same afternoon, sitting in that hotel room. He was honest the way he had always been honest. He said, there is someone I need to be fair to before anything else. Claire nodded. Because that was exactly who he was. And that precision, that refusal to be careless with another person's feelings even in a moment discharged, was precisely the reason she had loved him in the first place. He left Austin the following morning. Over the next 2 weeks he had 3 conversations that mattered. One with his attorney, about whether the documents Claire had saved 11 months ago held any evidentiary value to the ongoing federal case. They did. Claire was contacted by a federal investigator, submitted the encrypted drive, and was formally interviewed. The spreadsheet she had preserved became part of the prosecution's file, helping close 2 threads in the case that investigators had not yet been able to tie off. One conversation was with his therapist. And one conversation was with Lauren. Claire did not ask about the details of that last conversation. She did not want them. She stayed in Austin, worked her morning shifts at the Grand Meridian, and waited. Not with expectation pressing against her ribs. But with the particular stillness of a person who has finally told the truth and is now simply living in whatever that truth brings back. 6 weeks after that Tuesday morning in the 4th floor corridor, Daniel drove back to Austin. He did not call ahead. He walked through the front entrance of the Grand Meridian at 12:45 on a Thursday afternoon, asked for Claire at the front desk, and sat down in the lobby to wait. Beverly, who had no context for any of what was unfolding, sent a staff member to find Claire in the basement laundry room where she was rotating linen stock. When Claire walked out into the lobby and saw him standing near the window with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the front door, she stopped walking entirely. He crossed the room when he saw her. He stopped 2 feet away and said, I talked to everyone I needed to talk to. She waited. He said, I'd like to start again. If that is something you still want. She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that the front desk clerk, who had been watching this unfold with visible curiosity, leaned slightly forward without realizing it. Then Claire said, I want that. And that was enough. They did not rush. They did not pretend the 11 months had not happened or that the distance could simply be folded away. They talked about it repeatedly, in the honest and sometimes uncomfortable way that people talk when they know what losing something truly feels like and do not want to be careless again. They had dinner in Austin 3 times over 2 months. Then Claire drove to Nashville for a weekend. Then Daniel came back to Austin. They were careful with each other in the particular way people are careful when they have survived a loss and understand in their bones what it cost. Her architectural firm had not survived her absence. She had let the lease lapse before she left and quietly handed her active projects to a colleague. So she started over from the beginning. She found a small rental near her old Nashville neighborhood. She reached out to former clients. She rebuilt her portfolio one project at a time. It was slower than starting from nothing because grief was threaded through the rebuilding, the grief of everything the year had taken. But she moved forward. Every single day, she moved forward. 14 months after that Tuesday morning in the hotel corridor, Daniel proposed again. Same kitchen. Not because he was recreating the moment as a sentimental gesture, but because he told her afterward that he simply could not think of a more honest place than the room where ordinary daily life happened. She had soap on her hands again, as it turned out, because she had been rinsing a coffee mug. When she turned around he was already on one knee. He said, "I still don't want to do this life without you." And she laughed, the kind of laugh that holds an entire year of everything inside it, and said yes again. This time without anything waiting in the background. This time with both eyes open, both hearts steadied, and the full weight of everything they had survived between them making the answer feel more solid and more chosen than any easy yes ever could. Beverly, her supervisor from the Grand Meridian, received an invitation to the wedding. She came. She sat toward the back and cried quietly through the vows and told everyone at her table afterward that she had not known, not even for a moment, that the composed and careful woman who folded pillowcases every morning at 5 was carrying all of that underneath the surface. But that is the truth about people, isn't it? The ones we pass in hallways and lobbies and early morning corridors. We almost never know what they are carrying. We almost never know what they have already survived. We almost never know what kind of love is still waiting for them just beyond whatever they are quietly getting through. We want to leave you with this. Not just the ending, though the ending is worth holding. We want you to hold the whole shape of this story. Claire made a decision rooted in fear. A real and legitimate fear. And that decision cost her a year of her life and came very close to costing her the person she loved most in the world. But she never stopped doing the right thing. She saved the files when most people would have looked away. She told the truth when the moment finally demanded it. She submitted her evidence even when it was no longer necessary for her own safety, because it was the right thing to do for people she would never meet, whose pension funds had been quietly stolen from them while she was folding sheets in a hotel on the other side of the state. And when Daniel stood in that lobby 6 weeks later and offered her a second chance, she said yes without reaching for it desperately. She said yes like someone who had learned, at real cost, that the things most worth having are the things you have already proven you can survive losing. Sometimes protecting someone looks like standing beside them through everything. And sometimes, just sometimes, it looks like leaving so quietly that they never know what you spared them from. The difference lives in what you are willing to carry alone. We want to ask you something before we go. And we mean this with complete sincerity. Have you ever made a decision that looked like a mistake to everyone on the outside, but you knew the reason no one else could see? Have you ever carried something heavy and hidden because putting it down felt more dangerous than holding it? If you have, drop it in the comments below. You do not have to share every detail. You can just say, "I carried it." Because somewhere in this comment section right now, someone needs to read those words and know they are not alone. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. This has been African Untold Stories. We will see you in the next one.